Hello friends, Jeff here with House of Heresy and back again with another deck tech video for EDH slash Commander. If you haven't seen my first two, I first did Gruta Doom of the Depths in my first video, and then my second video was Isika with really the Prismatic Bridge Super Friends deck. So today we are going to be looking at one of my newer decks, or more recent built decks. And it's also the first mono color deck that I did, if you don't count my colorless artifact deck that I'll get to eventually. So this is mono blue Merfolk, with the commander being Svyelun of Sea and Sky. So she came out in Modern Horizons 2. And her big thing is that she's indestructible as long as you have at least two other Merfolk, and when she attacks, you get to draw a card. And other Merfolk you control have Ward 1. So she does not get Ward, and she does not have indestructible unless you have two other Merfolk, so three including her. But she does get the attack trigger, and she's got a pretty good stat line there at 3-4 or 3 power 4 toughness for only 3 costs. So all in all, she's a pretty fun commander. You could definitely pick some other ones, which we'll go through if you wanted to have a different commander. But I like her. I like the card. I like the artwork. I think she's excuse me. I think she's fun. Yeah, definitely big thumbs up to Nikachu for kind of putting the bug in my ear through his content to take a look at Merfolk as a deck, as a commander deck specifically, because he does a lot of modern and pioneer. So if you've never checked his stuff out, he does great content. He's a lot of fun to watch. Doesn't do any like box openings or anything like that, but he just produces a lot of good content. He does playthroughs with his decks on Magic the Gathering Online, and then he also does all just random topics 5 days a week, pretty much Monday through Friday. So yeah, really good stuff. Definitely enjoy his reviews of the AI generated Magic cards. They're very entertaining. So yeah, let's get into it. All right, so obviously with this being a tribal deck, you definitely want to focus on having cards that are in the tribe. So this whole stack here is creatures. There's only 2, I believe, in here that are not Merfolk, but they do a lot of different things. I kind of joked that these are the sea elves, the Merfolk. I'm sure a lot of people take that view of it. They're not quite as prolific as the regular elves in terms of like generating tokens, although that is definitely a piece of this deck. But what they do is they bring a lot of the fun stuff of blue into a tribal environment, so you get a lot more control heavy stuff. I tend to run this deck more as an aggro focused. I want to get in there, I want to attack. A lot of the cards that I have in this deck enable that approach, so that I can attack without being blocked, or there's some payoff like drawing cards and stuff, because really at the end of the day this deck wants to draw a lot of cards to get even more Merfolk on the board, to generate more Merfolk, to attack more, and eventually kill everybody. So really not any other win con besides combat for the most part. I don't believe I have any. I don't really have any combos, at least not that I'm aware of. Did not intentionally put any like infinite combos or anything in here. And honestly, I've actually gotten a decent number of player kills with Svyelun herself, just buffing her up. So we'll go through all that stuff. So all right, so the first set of creatures in here are the lords, and a lot of them do other things as well, but generally a lord is going to buff the creature tribal type. So in this case, Merfolk. So all these next few creatures are all going to essentially be giving Merfolk +1/+1. So this one's Mero Reidri, just got a reprint in the anime format in Jumpstart 22. So pretty cool. But it buffs your Merfolk creatures. It is a lord, and then whenever you play a Merfolk spell, you may tap or untap target permanent. So this lets you get more damage in potentially if you can tap down blockers as you're playing them in the first main phase, or if you're playing some of the flash Merfolk, you can, I don't know, potentially tap down other things. It's just nice utility on top of being a lord. 3 costs is, I would say it's pretty average for the lords. 2 is ideal for this deck. Like the 2 cost creatures tend to get the most bang for your buck, but only having 1 blue is nice here. It's good to have the option to just use generic. So, all right, so that's the first one. Then you get the classic Lord of Atlantis. Gives them all +1/+1 and Island Walk, which we'll get into later, how we take advantage of that. But he's definitely a very strong one for 2 blue and a 2/2 body there. All right, then you got, this is one of the, actually I think this is the newest Lord. Vidalian Hex Catchers came out in Dominator United. It does have Flash. Gives everyone +1/+1, and then you can sack a Merfolk to counter target non-creature spell unless it's a controller plays 1. So this is definitely handy because, as I said, this is Merfolk is tribal with control because it's blue. So having that extra control capability on the body is nice. Definitely can get you out of some bad situations, or at least just force your opponents to take this card into account, because you don't have to. You can sack this one, or you can sack your other Merfolk. So you could be a little expensive, but you could flash this one in, pay the 1, and then sack it to. Or I'm sorry, you don't have to pay the 1. Just 2 mana counter spell essentially. So pretty good. It's a nice addition. You got Merfolk Sovereign. Another Lord here, +1/+1, and then you can tap it. Target Merfolk can't be blocked this turn. That's really helpful. Anytime you can get through for damage, especially if you get some of your enablers in there, like card draw enable and stuff like that, then you can really start churning through your deck. And then you get Master of the Pearl Trident. So same as Lord of Atlantis, you just give him +1/+1 and Island Walk. So Island Walk's very handy. And we have ways to ensure that your opponents have islands so that you can walk over to them. All right, last one can be a commander. This is one of the ones that you can level up. So it's just a 2 mana 2/2 to start with, but then you can pay 1 to give it 3/3 and flying, which is helpful because that's one of the weaknesses of this deck is we don't have a lot of great ways to interact with flying creatures. And flying in general is a nice way to ensure you get damage in, because a lot of other decks don't have easy ways to deal with flyers. So getting a 3/3 body there, and then finally a level 4, you can become a Lord, a 4/4 flyer with +1/+1 to other Merfolk. So it's pretty nice. All right, next batch of Merfolk here are going to be pretty much just they want to do stuff in combat. So this one a little expensive for what it does, 3 mana for a 1/2, but when he attacks, draws a card. So that's nice because you don't have to connect, you just have to attack, and then you get the attack trigger out of it. So guaranteed a card draw as long as you turn him sideways to attack. C4 Oracle gives you whenever any Merfolk you control deals combat damage to player, draw a card. So you get cards equal to the number of Merfolk that are dealing combat damage, so that's really handy. Again, a little on the pricier side, 4 mana, but for what he does and his stats, it's not terrible. It's actually a really good card. Tide Shaper. This one will get a little buffed up if you got if you have an opponent with an island, so that's good. And then True Name Nemesis. So now we're getting more into, okay, so those are more the attack-based ones. These ones are more focused on kind of like the control utility side of it. So True Name here, he's got, when you have ETBs, you pick a player, and then he's got protection from the chosen player, and he's a 3/1. So one of the better attack stats on a Merfolk. And then, I'm sorry, these are, I apologize, these are still the attack-based ones. So here's one that can't be blocked. However, you need to have Svyelun out for it to matter, because otherwise he's a 0/3. But for 2 mana, 2/3 that can't be blocked is pretty good, because you're probably going to have Svyelun out most of the time, or at least that would be the intent. And then you got another creature that can't be blocked, because again, you want to get those attack and or damage triggers in for a lot of the enablers that are in this deck. And another can't be blocked. So just good ways to ensure that you're making that happen. All right, now we're getting into the control side of it. So this one, when Modern Horizons 2 came out, this one wasn't really super highly sought after or well thought of. It's kind of It's a 1/2, which is nice. It does have Island Walk, which is helpful, but the tap target land kind of can be very situational. I will say that for everything that it offers, this is almost a no-brainer because a 1-mana 1/2 with Island Walk is really strong, just in general with how this deck is built. But then you have the utility of on an opponent's upkeep tapping down their Gaia's Cradle or their uh, Nykthos or Cabal Coffers or something like that. So you can really force an opponent to make tough decisions with their land or just shut down their turn. So really strong for what he can do. Doesn't not always going to get into that the ability there, but it's still really nice utility to have there. Then you got Curse Catcher. So this is another one similar to the Vidalian Hex Catcher. You can sacrifice him specifically though, and then counter the spell. This one's instant or sorcery, whereas the Vidalian Hex Catcher is any non-creature spell. So a little bit more restrictive, but still really strong, especially for only 1 mana. The Lull Mage Mentor. This one, whenever you do counter a spell through an ability or spell, you get to create a 1/1 blue Merfolk token, and it's blue, so you have a pretty decent chance in this deck of countering some stuff to generate some bodies. And then if you had 7 untapped Merfolk, you could counter target spell and generate another one. Probably not going to use this one too much. I do try to go wide, but usually that makes me a big threat, so tend to go a little bit more vertical on Svyelun. That's been the most effective in this deck, but you might be in a situation where you have 7 Merfolk on the table and can do that. All right, you got Kopala, Warden of Waves. So this one's almost like a white card. You're basically making everything more expensive for your opponents to cast or activate. So pretty nice. It's only when they target a Merfolk that you control, so it's a little situational, but still not bad, and it provides that effect for all your Merfolk on the battlefield. Harbinger of Tides. So this one you can pay 2 more to flash him in, but when he ETBs, you return target tap creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. So this is a great way if you got 4 open mana to bounce somebody that's attacking you, assuming that they don't have vigilance. If you just really want to make it challenging for your opponent to keep recasting some big beefy creature or expensive creature, great way to interact with it. So just a nice control element on a body, and it's at its most basic, it's a 2 mana 2/2, so not terrible in this deck. Tempest Caller. This one, again, a little bit on the high side for Merfolk, costing 4, but it is a 2/3, and then when it ETBs, you tap all creatures target opponent controls. So this is a great way to guarantee getting in with however many Merfolk you're trying to attack with, and just a nice utility card to have in the deck is available to you. And then you got the Trickster. When it ETBs, you can tap target creature an opponent controls. It loses all abilities until end of turn. Again, can be a little situational, but at its most basic, it's got flash, and it's a 2 mana 2/2, so pretty strong. And then the ability can be really, it could potentially be pretty game changing, but it can definitely make things challenging for your opponents. So just another way to enable combat damage at a minimum, or even just have an extra body on the battlefield. Thieving Skydiver can be a little situational, but I like it. I think it's a good, solid creature. It is a flyer, which is helpful. So at a minimum, you got a 2 mana 2/1 that flies. However, you can kick it, and when it ETBs, you can gain control of target artifact with whatever CMC based on what you kicked it for. And then if it's an equipment, you can attach it to them. So Commander has lots of really, really strong, ridiculously powerful artifacts. So definitely a really good card, and just having a body with flying on it's really nice in this deck. It's really strong, great card to throw in a Merfolk deck. All right, now we're getting into more just the utility side. This one's still kind of control, but in its own way. But Empress Galena, for those that have ever played Merfolk that have it in there, or have her in there, or any deck that have her in there, it can be pretty devastating because you just pay 2 blue and gain control of target legend or legendary permanent. You can keep doing this every time she's untapped. So really strong card. It is 5 mana for a 1/3. However, the effect that she can have on the board gets pretty stupid, especially since any commander is going to be a legend or legendary permanent. So really, really fun card. This will definitely get the attention of your opponents. Make for some very entertaining games as you start snagging everybody's commanders and stuff. All right, then we got Thada Adel, Acquisitor. So she does have Island Walk, and whenever she deals combat damage, you can search that player's library for an artifact and exile it, and then you can play that card until end of turn. So if this, again, kind of situational, you kind of need to know what your opponents have, but almost everybody has at least 1 or 2 artifacts. Worst case, you steal somebody's Soul Ring out of their deck. There's not a lot of downside to doing it, unless you just completely whiff. But that's almost everybody has artifacts in there because they're just such an integral part of the format. So really strong, and then having the Island Walk on there as well is really nice. Stony Brook Banneret has Island Walk as well, and makes things cheaper. So now we're getting into kind of the utility side of it, just straight utility, not so much the control. So it is a 2-mana 1/1, but the Island Walk's great, and then reducing all your Merfolk spells by 1 is very helpful, because as you saw, some of these Merfolk do kind of cost a little bit. Deep Channel Mentor, this one's very expensive at 6 mana, but blue creatures you control are unblockable. So if you can get this on the board and he sticks, it's gonna, like everything else doesn't matter, like Island Walk, all that stuff. You're just swinging every chance you get. So just can be a little situational due to the cost, because this deck wants to go kind of fast. But if you can get him out there, especially with a lot of bodies on the board, can definitely alter the outcome of the game quite a bit. Here's another one of the new ones. This is again from Dominaria United. So Emperor Mihail II. He costs 3. He's you would think he'd be a lord, but he doesn't buff them directly. So you can look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may cast Merfolk spells from the top of your library. Whenever you cast a Merfolk spell, you may pay 1. If you do, create a 1/1 blue Merfolk creature token, and it is a 3/3. So at its most basic level, 3 mana 3/3 is really good in this deck, because we don't have a lot of stats that in the 3+ range there. And then on top of that, you get to filter through the top of your library there, and you can cast Merfolk spells right off the top. So and you're not revealing it, so you just get to look at it, which is quite nice. So yeah, I think he's really good. This is one of the ones that you could be an easy swap between him and Svyelun for the commander. I would almost say this one might even be a little bit stronger. I really like Svyelun, so I built this deck and specifically for her to be the commander. However, if you were looking for a more way to create consistency within the deck, this is a pretty strong one. So, and he's probably going to stick a little bit better with the body that he has. Actually, I take that back. Svyelun does have a stronger body, but regardless, quite good. And then you can be generating Merfolks as well. Like you could start going wide with him, which is quite nice. All right, got the Marrow Harbinger, which also has Island Walk. Costs 4, but does have 2/3, so kind of balances out. And then whenever it ETBs, you can search your library for a Merfolk card, reveal it, shuffle your library, put that card on top of it. So this is a good one to play first main phase, and then kind of stack what you want on there, because you're most attack steps, especially once you have enough mana to cast this one, you're gonna be generating card draw either through the attack trigger or the damage trigger. So pretty good way to pretty much guarantee that you're getting the Merfolk that you want to come out next. So I like it. I think even though it costs 4, I think it's still pretty strong for the deck. Wanderwine Prophets, this one probably one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive Merfolk I have in here. However, the upside to him is huge. So if you can get him out, then you have a very, very good chance of just ending the game. So he's got Champion Merfolk, so when he enters the battlefield, you have to sacrifice him unless you remove another Merfolk from the game, and then that Merfolk will return when he leaves the game. But the big thing is that when he deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice a Merfolk if you do take an extra turn after this one. And he's got a 4/4 body, but yeah, you can definitely chain together turns, especially if you are unblockable or have Island Walk online. You can pretty much shut the game down at that point, to where your opponents can't just get to sit back and watch you take turns and deal combat damage. So great card, a little expensive, but overall I think it's worth the long shot of it paying off in there. Sea Scryer, this is the 1 mana dork I have in here. 2 mana for a 1/1's pretty common for the mana dorks. You can either add a colorless mana or you can pay 1 to add a blue. So just nice having a little bit extra ramp. Silvergill Adept just wants to draw cards, so when he ETBs, it's going to draw a card. You can get it at this cost if you reveal a Merfolk, which most likely you'll have in hand. Otherwise, it's going to cost a whole lot more and probably not be worth it. And then we get into the last 2 creatures that are, and the only 2 that are not Merfolk in this deck. So first one's Sea Hunter, and this is, again, a very, very strong card for the deck. You pay 4 for a 2/2, and then once he's no longer summoning sick, you can pay 3 to tap him, search your library for a Merfolk card, and put that card into play, then shuffle your library. So you can chain him into Empress Galena, and then have all kinds of fun on the following turns, assuming that they survive. But yeah, very strong card for Merfolk. Great way to just cheat any card, any Merfolk you want out onto the board. And finally, also from Dominaria United, we have Defiler of Dreams. This is the blue Defiler from that set of cards. So this is another flyer. It does cost 5, a little expensive, but gives you essentially the Phyrexian mana for once for each spell. And then whenever you cast a blue permanent, you draw a card, which is what this deck wants to do. So all in all, even though not a Merfolk, great enabler to get more Merfolk on the board and give you alternate costs for them. Okay, so that takes care of the creatures. So as you can see, there's lots of Merfolk in there. I don't remember the exact number that I have. Let's count right now. So 31 Merfolk counting Svyelun. So you got 30 in the deck itself. So almost 1/3, just a little shy of 1/3 of the deck is Merfolk, which is great. So 32 creatures counting the Defiler and the Sea Catcher. All right, so next pile's pretty short, but this is a way to ensure that your island walk is online. So you got Sea's Claim, which is enchants the land and it becomes an island. It's also a great way to shut down some of the more powerful lands out there. Spreading Seas, exactly the same, except you get to draw a card. It does cost 1 more, but quite good. No reason not to have it in here. And then you got Aquatex Will. So it's a sorcery, and then you put a flood counter on target land, and that land is an island in addition to its other types for as long as it has a flood counter on it. And if you have a Merfolk, you get to draw a card. So a lot of upside for 1 blue mana. So again, very strong, and being able to enable the island walk that you have in the deck is quite handy. Okay, so next, this deck cares about Merfolk. So this is, for the most part, enabling the tribal side of it, specifically the Merfolk. So you got Marrow Commerce, which is a Merfolk tribal enchantment, and at the end of your turn, untap all Merfolk you control. So great way to just swing in, because you want to be doing lots of damage, and you don't have to worry so much about blockers, or brings your activated abilities online again if they tap to use. So you could actually, with this out, you could use Emperor Galena twice in a turn rotation, which is quite nice. Once on yours and then once on somebody else's once she untaps. So really strong card for only 2 mana. Deeproot Waters, whenever you cast a Merfolk spell, you create a 1/1 Merfolk token, so this helps you go wide. Pretty strong as well. Gets more of those Merfolk bodies on the battlefield. Aquatic Incursion, when it ETBs, you create 2 Merfolk that, again, have hexproof, same as the last one there. And then you can pay 3 in a blue to make a Merfolk unblockable. So, again, quite handy. Can really help like Svyelun or some of the other bigger bodies get in, swing in for you. Kindred Discovery, this one was reprinted in Baldur's Gate. So when it ETBs, you pick a creature type, and then whenever a creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield or attacks, draw a card. So a little expensive, a little slow at 5 mana, but the upside's pretty strong, especially in late game when you want to get as many cards as you can in hand to really ensure that you're able to keep that momentum going, and you don't just go into top deck mode there. So pretty good card all around. May or may not come into play, but strong. There's another 5 cost. This one's a little bit easier because it only needs the 1 blue, although at that point in the game you should have multiple islands out. But again, you pick a creature type when it ETBs, and whenever you cast a spell of the chosen type, you copy that spell. So outside of the handful of legendary creatures we have, or merfolk, legendary merfolk we have, this will help the board state get quite large. And as you saw, a lot of those merfolk do other things in addition to just being a member of the tribe, and getting double of those abilities or effects or whatever, it can be very strong. So another really good card. All right, Door of Destinies. This one's a fun one. You pick creature type, so merfolk when it ETBs, and then whenever you cast a spell of the chosen type, you put a charge counter on it, and creatures of the chosen type get +1/+1 for each charge counter on the Door of Destinies. So if you can get this one out early, I mean, at a minimum by turn 4 it would be great, but if you could get it out even earlier and then start pumping out the merfolk, it is cast, so like the tokens aren't going to trigger it, but they will benefit from the +1/+1 because they are of the merfolk tribe. So very strong card, great enabler. Then we get into some of the more traditional ones that a lot of people I'm sure are familiar with. So Vanquisher's Banner. You pick merfolk, they get +1/+1, and then you get to draw a card whenever you cast that creature type. Icon of Ancestry. Same thing, you're picking merfolk, they get +1/+1. And then you can also go searching for them on the top of your library, which is nice ability to do. Kefnit's Monument. This one makes blue creature spells you cast one less, so a little bit cheaper, and this will benefit from the 2 non-merfolk creatures in your deck as well. And whenever you cast a creature spell, target creature an opponent controls doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So nice way to keep kind of locked down the board, especially if you're able to start spamming out cheaper merfolk. Heraldic Banner, you pick a color, so you're picking blue, obviously, and then they get +1/+1/+0, and then you add a mana of the chosen color. So it's a mana rock that also buffs your creatures. Herald's Horn, again, pick a creature type, merfolk, and then they cost 1 less to cast, and you can look at the top of your library, and if it's a creature of the chosen type, you may reveal it, put it into your hand. So this is before you draw your card for the turn. So very strong. 3 mana, definitely worth throwing in there. And then finally, Quicksilver Fountain. So this one's not so much about the merfolk themselves. I probably should have put this in the last pile. But at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player puts a flood counter on target non-island land he or she controls. That land is an island as long as it's a flood counter on it. And then at the end of a turn, if all lands in play are islands, remove all flood counters from them. So likelihood of that happening is a little bit low, and at that point, at that stage in the game, it's probably not super relevant. Big thing is, as long as this makes a full turn rotation, every opponent will have an island by the time it gets back to you, and you'll be able to have Island Walk fully online. So great card, very strong. I'm actually going to put it in the pile it should have been in. Okay, so that's for the most part, that's the top row is all about the merfolk and interacting with the tribe in some way or enabling the tribe to happen. Now we're going to get into just some more generic good stuff that the deck wants to do. So I got some equipment here. These are usually going to wind up on Svyelun, but may or may not. She could use the protection herself because she does not give herself ward. So having like Swiftfoot Boots or Lightning Greaves is quite handy. Great way to keep her alive and kicking and let her start attacking the turn she comes in, hopefully on turn 2 or 3. Then you got Stoneforge Masterwork, so this one also cares about merfolk. So you get enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control that shares a creature type with it. There are no other gods in the deck, so if this goes on Svyelun, it'll only be merfolk. Some of the other, actually, I guess it probably wouldn't matter. Yep, wouldn't matter. Okay, so as long as it's a merfolk, they're going to get +1/+1. So just very strong, can really go Voltron pretty hard and swinging for a lot of damage, especially if you got it on Svyelun with a wide board. She can be threatening Commander lethal pretty quickly. Same thing with this one, Commander's Plate. This is such a good card for colorless or monocolored commanders. Even if you don't plan on swinging with them, just the protection that it offers. Essentially 4 mana protection from every color that is outside of your commander's color pie is just good. And then making it a 3/3 on top of it is icing on the cake, really, in my opinion. It's very easy to get it on the board early because it only costs 1 mana. You could play it opening hand if you don't have anything else, and then get it on Svyelun as soon as possible. So excellent card, highly recommend it. It is quite good in any commander that even remotely wants to attack. That's one color, 1 or 2 colors, or none. It's colorless, and it also is just a good protection for most commanders. So next we got I think this is more about the card draw. So because we draw so many cards, we really want no maximum hand size, and we have quite a few cards that enable that. For 1 mana, no maximum hand size is great to begin with, and then you can also tick this one up. You can draw 2 cards and it becomes level 2, and then whenever you draw a card, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. And with how much card draw you have, you can definitely start buffing it up. And the nice thing is that we do, as you saw, we have a couple creatures in the deck that draw cards on the attack trigger, so that means you're swinging in for even more when you actually go to the damage step there. So really good card for what it does, great in this deck. Biden of Thassa. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. So as you can see, we definitely want those no maximum hand sizes because we have a lot of ways to really generate a lot of card draw every turn. And it feels bad when you have to start discarding those into your graveyard. So highly recommend getting as many of those types of effects in there. This one's a little, I keep debating if I want to pull this one out. Only because 4 mana is kind of pricey for what it does. I have a lot of other cheaper card draw enablers. But just being able to goad your opponent, well, I say goad, it's technically not because they can attack you with this ability. There's just some good utility here with that ability on there, with that activated ability. So for now, it's staying in. This is one of those ones that's high on the list of possibly taking out because as I'll talk about in the end, there's definitely a lot of cards that I didn't put in for a variety of reasons that I could. And this would be an easy one to flex out, especially if I'm going into like a higher, more competitive, I guess is a better way to put it, more competitive pod. It might be better to have like more counter spells in there, or if it's lower competitive pod, maybe do another Merfolk or some more enablers or something like that. But for now, it's in there, but it's definitely one I keep an eye on. Reconnaissance Mission. This is a little bit expensive, does the same thing. Whenever creature you control does combat damage to player, draw a card. It does have cycling, so it's not like it'll just get stuck in your hand if you just can't afford to pay the 4 mana, and then at least you'll get a card out of it. Seagate Restoration. This one's actually, I technically count this one when I'm considering the number of lands to put in this deck because it will flip for a land. There. So we'll talk about the actual card itself first, but you can pay 3 life and it'll enter untapped, or you can just play it on the backside and it'll enter tapped. But it lets you draw cards equal to the number of cards in hand, and then you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. So that means that there's no way that your opponent can interact with that. Jinx Access won't shut it down. It can't be blown up like Reliquary Tower or Thought Vessel or something like that. So it's a really strong card. 7 mana is really pricey, which is why I count it as a land, because that's a little bit situational, but still very good card. Definitely worth having in here if you got the space for it. And then finally, Distant Melody. So you pay 4 mana to choose a creature type, draw a card for each permanent you control of that type. So if you got a nice wide board, you can draw a lot of cards for 4 mana. Situational, as always, because you may or may not have enough to make it worthwhile. Like if you just have one Merfolk on the board, paying 4 mana for that one card is not a great way to do it, unless it's just like a last resort. But it's a nice good card to have in there. All right, so then we're going to get into more of the mana rocks. Cage Sun, I debated putting where I wanted to put this because it is an enabler. However, it's also a great way to generate lots of mana, as we'll get into. So Cage Sun, when it ETBs, you pick a color, in this case blue, obviously. Blue creatures you control will get +1/+1, so it's got the Anthem effect there. And then whenever a land's ability causes you to add 1 or more mana of the chosen color, add 1 additional mana of that color. So all your islands will tap for 2. Some of the other Some of the other lands that we have will also tap for 2 in there, so just really strong for 6 mana. Does a lot of good things. May or may not be able to cast it depending on how fast paced you're playing, but it's definitely, I think it's worth having in there. It's a good card to have in there. Got Nyx Lotus. Any of the mono colored decks really will benefit from the devotion cards as long as you are focused more on permanence. Like if you're doing like a mono blue control deck where you're mostly playing on other people's turns, this probably is not for you. But since we have lots of blue permanents in this deck, you can definitely tap this for a lot of mana if you're able to keep them on the board. And as you saw with the creatures, a lot of the creatures have 2 or more blue in their cost. So that really enables Nyx Lotus quite a bit. So it's a good card, definitely worth considering. Sapphire Medallion, just a nice classic. All the medallions, if you can get them in the monocolor decks, they're great. 2 mana just to make your blue spells cost 1 less. So in most cases, this will discount. There's a couple that are only for cost 1 or 2 blue. Won't affect that. Doesn't affect your colorless artifacts, but everything else really strong. Decanter of Endless Water. This was a new one that came out of Baldur's Gate. 3 mana for no maximum hand size and add 1 mana of any color. 3 mana rocks, kind of on the fence. Most people are kind of down on them, but this one's got so much upside, especially for this deck. Like having the extra no maximum hand size is really good, and then getting to tap it for blue just really makes it nice. So I think it's worth having in here. If you're more mana cost sensitive, or you're building your deck to go faster, this might not be worth it. But I think overall it's a pretty strong include for me. Thought Vessel does the same thing, but it costs 1 less, and you only tap for a colorless, so kind of up in the air there a little bit. But in terms of like which is better, but you'll get this one out faster. So having redundancy is good too, because your opponents might be able to interact with 1 or 2 of your no maximum hand size permanents on the board, but the more you have, the less likely it is that they'll be able to take care of all of them. Of course, Soul Ring, it's a classic, can't not have it. Arcane Signet, again, another classic. Just getting two for a blue, always good. And then High Tide, which actually just got a reprint in Dominaria Remastered, but this is one of the old ones, or old versions of it. So you play it until end of turn, all islands produce an additional blue when tapped for mana. So depending on what your board state is, this could be quite strong. Especially if you can use, say, an Arcane Signet to cast it instead of one of your islands, then you really can maximize the additional mana there. So this deck generally is pretty cheap in terms of its mana value or CMC. So it's really going to come down to, do you have a couple of really expensive things in your hand, or do you just have a really large hand? And then if either of those answers is yes, then this is probably a pretty strong card. And it's an instant, so you could conceivably do it on somebody else's turn too if you needed to cast some big spells or interact or whatever. All right, and then the last stack, before we get to the land base, is All Interaction. So this is the one board wipe that the deck has. Cyclonic Rift, probably don't need to explain it to anybody because it is one of the most iconic blue cards in the game, but quite strong. Can be single target removal if you need to cast it on a budget, but most people play the 7 mana to bounce all your opponents' non-land permanents back to their hand, so quite strong. Crashing Tide. So this one is a single target removal, so it's got flash as long as you control Merfolk, and then you bounce the target creature to its owner's hand and draw a card. All around pretty good. A little bit situational, obviously. Your opponent needs to have a creature for this really to benefit. You could cast it on yourself if you're just dying to get a card or to get a card draw, but generally speaking, this would be either preemptive or defensive. Pongify, another one of those kind of classic blue cards. So pay blue, destroy a creature, and they get a 3/3 green ape creature token. So this is really our only single target destructive removal, specific to creatures, but quite good. And then we'll get into the counters. So I originally built this deck, or my first iteration as I was crafting it, I should say. I just pulled out all my counter spells, everything that I had on hand, and it ended up being like, I don't know, like 12 14 counterspells, something like that. So I pared it down to, I think, 4. Let's see. Yep, 4. Because I have some other interaction here, and frankly, this deck wants to go fast. If I'm going full-blown control, there's better decks to play that with. That's just my opinion. Maybe you want to have a cool tribal with lots of control. Totally fine. Nothing wrong with that at all. That's just not how I built the deck. So just understand that there's lots of options when it comes to counter magic. I just pick 4. So Force of Will, classic card, just also got a reprint and Dominaria Remastered. Very, very strong. And yeah, not much to say about that. Just excellent card. Force of Negation, same thing. These are the only 2 free counter spells that I have in here. So, but they're potentially free from a mana cost. So also very, very good. Definitely worth looking at if you haven't seen it. It's gotten a reprint a couple times actually. I believe it originally came in Modern Horizons 1, then the time-shifted version was in Modern Horizons 2, and then it got a full reprint in Double Masters 2022. So it's definitely probably the cheapest it's been in a bit still, since the Double Masters 2022 prices are still kind of down. But yeah, great card. And then, of course, the classic counterspell. Can't go wrong with that. So 2 mana, counter target spell. Doesn't care if it's non-creature, creature, whatever. So just good to have in here. And finally, an offer you can't refuse, because I wanted to have a 1 mana counterspell, and I don't own Swansong. So this was a nice, easy one to throw in there. Pay 1, counter target non-creature spell, and its controller creates 2 treasure tokens. I would say this is probably worse than Swansong, because treasure is almost always better for the player that's receiving it than a 2/2 flyer, but could be kind of situational. It is what it is. It's a 1 mana counterspell, and it's what I have. So that's it for the non-land cards. Now we'll get into the land base. So obviously I have lots of islands in here. So the first few lands are going to be not islands, and then the rest will be basic lands. So Cavern of Souls, anytime you're going to run a tribal deck, if you can afford it and or have copies of it, put it in there, because it is the easiest way to protect your key creatures, your key members of the tribe as you're casting them. So when it ETBs, you pick a creature type. You can either pay a colorless for anything, or you can add 1 blue or 1 mana of any color, in this case blue, to spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type, and that spell can't be countered. So it's really strong. Got a reprint in Double Masters 2022, so it's a little bit more affordable than it has been. Still an expensive card, but quite good. Otawara Soaring City. This one is the channel land from Kamigawa. Just really nice interaction. You get a discount in the generic cost of it based on the number of legendary creatures you control. So I do have a couple in this deck. Of course, Svyelun is, so it's a good chance it'll be a little bit less than 4. But you discard it for its channel cost, return target artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker to its owner's hand. So nice little interaction there. Or you just play it, and it's an untapped blue source. You got Reliquary Tower, quite important for this deck, having no maximum hand size. Nykthos, this is another one, just like was it the Lotus Bloom? Forget the name of the card. Nyx Lotus, sorry. Yep, so this one is very good. You can pay 2 to tap it to choose a color, in this case blue, and then you add mana to the mana pool equal to the amount of devotion that you have for that color. So if you got 4 creatures with 6 blue pips, or 6 island, symbols, 6 blue mana symbols in their cost, then you can tap it essentially for 3, because this has to tap as well. So 2 in this, and then you get 6 mana. So really strong. Gets even stronger the later the game goes and the wider your board gets. This one is another one that's very expensive and could probably use a reprint. So it's great in monocolor decks, the Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, but if I can understand where for cost purposes may or may not be worthwhile to put in there. Mutavault's just a good card. for most tribal decks, but especially one like Svyelun where she wants to have creatures around her. So sometimes you can interact with your opponent's interaction in ways that they may not be ready for. If they're not paying close attention to Mutavault being on the board, and they go to target Svyelun, you can make her indestructible if you turn this into a creature with all creature types, so into a Merfolk. And suddenly, assuming you have another creature out there, you bump her up into her indestructible threshold. So just a good solid land. It does only tap for colorless, so it could be a little problematic depending on like what you get in your opening hand, but still a great card. Mystic Sanctuary, no reason not to put it in here. It is an island on its own. If you have 3 or more islands, it enters the battlefield untapped. Or 3 or more other islands, so not counting this one. And then if it does enter untapped, you may put target instant or sorcery from your graveyard on top of your library. So you can recycle some of the counter magic or some of the other spells in there. Help get them back into your hand. Oh, Lonely Sandbar. This one does come into play tapped, so that is a downside. It does add a blue, but you can also cycle it and pay a blue to discard this card to draw a card. So I think that's good enough to put in the deck. There's definitely situations where having just a basic island would be better, but I feel like the utility of it outweighs the cost of it coming into play tapped. My opinion, may or may not. If you don't put it in there, then it's not like it's going to sink the deck or anything like that. And then Opal Palace, I believe this is the last. Yep, this is the last of the non-basic lands. So I like this one because you can start really buffing up Svyelun, and she can definitely do work through commander damage. This is another one that you could just as easily have an island in there and probably get more overall benefit for it. But I think the upside that Opal Palace offers is enough that it's worth putting in there. So you can tap it, just add a colorless, or you can pay 1 to tap it to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Blue, obviously, for this deck. And then if you spend this mana to cast your commander, it enters the battlefield with a number of additional 1/1 counters on it equal to the number of times it's been cast from the command zone this game. So if you use this the first time you cast her, she gets +1/+1. If you use this the second time you cast her, she gets +2/+2, and so on. So there's definitely some benefit to it. It is a reward for having your commander go back to the command zone a bunch of times, because that just feels bad in general usually, but I like it. And then I just have islands. So this deck and most of my monocolored decks are the same, as you'll see as I slowly work through them in this video series. I tend to go a lot lower on land. I only have 28 land in this. Actually, okay, so I do have 28 land. 29 if you count. Totally drawing a blank on the card. Seagate Restoration. So 29 if you count Seagate. That is low. I think most commander decks are running at least 33, 1/3 of their deck. A lot of them go in the mid to upper 30s into 40s. I feel like, especially with the mana curve of this deck, you can get away with it. There's definitely situations where you could be low on mana, but there aren't that many cards that are just going to be stuck in your hand if you aren't drawing lands every turn, or if you're missing land drops. And you have enough card draw that you can, I feel like you can counteract it. So it's definitely a judgment call. I'm comfortable making that, or taking that risk, and I do it with my other monocolored decks too. But that doesn't mean that you have to do it if you were to build your own Merfolk deck here. So it's definitely, it can be situational. Some colors want more land. So like the one monocolored deck that I do have that goes way above 28 lands is my Titania deck. That one's got, well, I think in the 40s, because she wants lands to be blown up and then coming back and all that stuff. But for this deck and for my other monocolor decks, it's kind of the direction that I go in it. It doesn't really hose me that much, because again, there's enough card draw that if you have to mulligan down to like 6 or 5 cards to get a couple lands in your hand, in your opening hand, then it's usually enough to kind of jumpstart and get you going. But you know, it's very dependent on you as a player and the deck and your pod and all that stuff. I'm willing to make the sacrifice in order to have more non-land cards in the deck, but not everybody might feel that way. So yeah, so that's Svyelun of Sea and Sky, the Merfolk Tribal Mono Blue deck. Hope everyone enjoyed it. As always, I am not an expert in deck tech. I just am sharing the way I build my decks. So take it with a grain of salt. I'm sure that there's much more efficient, better ways to build this deck. I'm sure if I sent the deck list to say Nikachu, who's I would consider to be one of the premier experts in Merfolk, he probably would tear it apart and have all sorts of thoughts on how to make it better. But so take it for what it is. But with that said, I would love to hear everyone's thoughts and comments on it. By all means, if you have any suggestions, please put a comment down there, because I'm always reviewing and tweaking and updating my decks, especially as new sets come out. I haven't updated this one since through the last couple sets, because really Brothers War didn't have much in the way of Merfolk, and I didn't feel the need to put the Jumpstart, the 1 or 2 Merfolk that we got out of Jumpstart in there. So, but I also didn't look that closely at it either, like the commons and uncommons that were in those packs. So yeah, if you got any suggestions, please throw them down there. Like I said, thanks for watching. If you liked what you saw, please give the channel or give this video a like. If you would like to see more, please subscribe, because we do have new content that comes out every week, twice a week. We're doing the openings, and then on Saturdays right now we're doing deck tech. So this will be live on a Saturday. So yeah, and then throw some comments down there. Very curious to hear what everyone's thoughts are. This is my first real tribal deck that I built. So there's definitely a lot of tribal enablers that I had to decide whether I wanted to include or not include. And these, I just kind of went in the direction of what you see here. There's definitely cards that I could have put in that I didn't, or that I picked up with the intention of putting in, and then had to deal with the reality of only being able to put 99 cards in the deck, and they ended up getting cut. But yeah, if you got any suggestions on any of that, please throw them down there in the comments. So thanks again, and until next time, have a great day.